Hello and good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Penresa and in partnership with Forbes Africa, thank you so much for joining us on this exclusive webinar with some of Mauritius's most influential figures in the finance sector. My name is Matthew Scott Rose, and I'll be your moderator today for today's discussion. Our topics today are going to include Mauritius's most recent entry as a high-income economy by the World Bank, the financial strategies that have been implemented that have placed the country as one of the fastest growing wealth markets in the world, and of course, the coronavirus, how the virus has impacted the finance sector and where the country in all its perseverance is headed for the future. Now, to begin, a few housekeeping notes. If this is your first time attending a webinar, you may notice that we're going to conduct it in a little bit of a different way than previous webinars that you might have attended in the past. So our goal today is to create a dialogue with you, our viewers, and the panelists that we have. So you will see that the microphone and camera are disabled on your end, but we do have a small Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. So this is where you can ask the questions that you want to know and to get the answers that you're most interested in. Now, we encourage you to do this at any point in the webinar, and you can ask these questions directly to our panelists. You're also going to see a chat section where we will periodically update you with helpful information, updates, and social media hashtags where you can share this experience with others. And lastly, for your convenience, this webinar is being recorded and it will be published and available for view at penresa.com. Now, without further ado, let's introduce our panelists. Let's see here. We'll see if we can get their videos going. Very nice. Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much. All right. Now, Akshad, would you be able to, there we are. I see we have your audio going now. All right, wonderful. Now, to introduce our panelists today, we do have Mr. Sanjeev Bhasin, CEO of Penresa Bank. Hello, Sanjeev, how are you doing today?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
At this webinar. I hope I'm able to contribute something. Thank you.
Absolutely, we're certain that you will. And we also have Dr. Ramakrishna Sithanan, our former Deputy Prime Minister and former Finance Minister of Mauritius, and now the current Director and Chairman of SANE Mauritius. It's very nice to see you again. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. Good afternoon, everybody.
Excellent.
And welcome to the show.
Yes. And we also have Mr. Akshar Maharali, Managing Director of WTS Tax Consulting. Hello, how are you doing?
Hi, Scott. Hi, everyone. Nice to be here and look forward to contributing.
Very nice. Perfect. All right. Now, thank you all for joining us. And so before we begin with viewer questions, what we'll do, I will pose a few introductory questions that are going to give us some of the thematic elements of the webinar. So as you have any questions or anything that you wish to know from our panelists, do please send in those questions and we'll ask directly. All right. Now, Dr. Rama, if you don't mind, let's begin with a question for you today. So over the years, Mauritius has become a competitive and thriving global financial hub. Now, as an economist with over 40 years experience, can you tell us, give us a little insight into what makes Mauritius unique and appealing to investors?
I think it's a combination of the right ecosystem, taking advantage of the first mover situation and adapting and adjusting to changing circumstances. Now, there's obviously the first mover advantage. You know, we started global business, as we call it today, in the early 90s. And most countries were not looking at it in this part of the world. This was a strategy by government to diversify the structure of the economy in order to enhance its resilience. So we have built expertise and we have acquired experience in that sector. So first mover advantage is very important. Second, I will call it the software, which is basically the political, economic, and social stability of Mauritius. In spite of the fact that there are many changes in government, there is basically what we call the permanence of the state, that most government that have been in office, have supported the development, the growth, and the diversification of global business. And they have given certainty, stability, and predictability to it. Now, of course, we have a robust and state-of-the-art legal framework. It enables business to be carried out in our country. It's also a fact that we've worked very hard to improve the ease of doing business in Mauritius and to make the cost of doing business competitive. I think both of these are very important. Mauritius is the #1 country in terms of ease of doing business in Africa for a very, very long time. And we have also worked very hard to make sure that our cost is competitive. We have also signed many double taxation agreement and also many investment promotion and protection agreement. What these two set of agreement do, one is to make it competitive in terms of taxation so that you're not taxed twice on the same income in two different countries. And two, it protects companies that invest in Mauritius from basically the risk of nationalization and the risk of not getting what is required when you're an investor in this country. Investment in human capital also is extremely important. Look, we sit in Mauritius, a small country, but on a per capita basis, we've got probably one of the highest number of lawyers and chartered accountants in Mauritius. And we continue to invest in education, in training, in order to sharpen the competitiveness of our people. We have also abolished foreign exchange control. This is very important when you are an investor. Whether you invest in Mauritius, whether you invest on the stock exchange, or you use Mauritius as a platform to invest in Asia and in Africa, you get the flexibility, of doing whatever you want, obviously within parameters of the law with foreign exchange. Now, many countries in Africa and there are many countries in Asia that have exchange control, and they also don't allow the free movement of capital. Mauritius allows the free movement of capital. We don't have any foreign exchange control. And we have also walked the extra mile in not introducing restrictions on ownership by foreigners. It's possible for foreigners to own 100% of the company that is set up in Mauritius. If they want to have a joint venture with local, they're welcome, but there's no restriction as it exists in other countries. So Mauritius has become an excellent platform for cross-border investment from the rest of the world into Asia and Africa. Just to give you one statistic, more than 40% of all cross-border investment into Africa are structured or domiciled and are carried out from Mauritius. We also have good functioning institutions. That's also important. Of course, there are challenges now and then, but on a long-term basis, the institutions, function. We're in a good time zone, and we are bilingual as far as English and French is concerned. So I think it's that ecosystem, a combination, of software, hardware, strategic positioning of the country that have made Mauritius both attractive and competitive for foreign direct investment into Mauritius, for portfolio investment in our stock exchange, and from using Mauritius as a gateway, as a platform for investment into Africa, into Asia.
Absolutely. Very, very well stated. And it seems that everything that you just said really lends to the topic of our conversation, which is why Mauritius is an investment destination. Now, Dr. Rama, you mentioned something just now that brings me to my next question for Sanjeev. And that was how Mauritius strives to be competitive in its taxes. So, Mr. Bassin, Mauritius has made significant strides in bringing its tax policy in line with international regulations such as the European Commission. Can you share with our viewers how Mauritius is adopting international best practices of financial governance? And as a matter of fact, we just had a viewer question as well that could nicely add to this. So how is Mauritius adopting these practices? But further, from the perspective of Resia Bank, how are these finances for investors being protected as well?
Okay, the best way to start answering the question is to take off from where Dr. Sidanand left.
Yes.
And he gave a good introduction as to where Mauritius has reached, having started in the early 90s. And my starting point would be, if you reflect on one of the success stories of Mauritius to be as an international financial center, it is probably due to the fact that they have always been compliant with all the relevant laws, which are necessarily seen as critical to develop the financial services status within the continent and within the globe. Because you're receiving investments from across the globe, and you're targeting the investments to flow into strategic developing economies of Africa and Asia. And you have to be compliant to all the changing regulations. And Mauritius must have been compliant entirely, because otherwise it would not have enjoyed the status it is enjoying. So the legislation has always been amended slowly over a period of time under each finance bill or at every time the budget is presented, so that whatever are the international guiding principles, the taxation laws or the improved governance principles, they always have been introduced from time to time. So I would say the regulatory bodies here have always tried to stay relevant and also integrate themselves within the requirements of the global platform. And this is expected to continue. We've also signed the Treaty of the Base Erosion and Profit Shifting BEPS, which is known as, that's also, plus the customer sharing agreements have been signed. So in all aspects, I would say you cannot find Mauritius lacking or shying away from all the requirements, be it OECD or other financial bodies, so that we remain relevant and we always be ready to welcome investments from any part of the world and direct them to any part of the world, preferably, of course, the advantage is if it is targeted to Asia and Africa, the knowledge base of these economies in this country is phenomenally high, so it is well suited for that reason. That would be my short and sweet answer.
Very nice. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, you did mention the tax treaties and BEPS, which would lead me to a question for Akshar today. We know that Mauritius has been renegotiating some of these tax treaties with other African countries such as Senegal and Zambia. How does Mauritius view these renegotiations, and what do you think is the way forward as Mauritius strives to unite itself with all of Africa?
Okay, so thank you, Scott, for this question, which is very topical and I think would be on the lips of many people who are on this webinar today. I think before I really answer your question, Scott, I think we all first need to understand that tax treaty renegotiation as such is part and parcel of the life cycle of a tax treaty and not necessarily an evil in itself. Now, there's been a lot of articles in the international press, bad press, I would say, insinuating, for example, that Mauritius tax treaty are being, to take the words that we've seen in the articles, are being torn up. I think we should clarify the situation as a first step. The Mauritius tax treaties themselves are not being questioned. Most of the tax treaties that Mauritius have signed, they follow the OECD model and therefore are already in line with international norms, right? And we should also not forget that tax treaties are signed by two governments out of their own free will at a specific point in time. Now, when it comes to taxing rights allocation under a tax treaty, it serves its purpose for a period, and then with time, definitely perspective, circumstances, economic situations change. So in these contexts, a treaty renegotiation may happen, and it's nothing abnormal, I would say. Now, to put things in context, since you mentioned Senegal and Zambia, I think we need to understand that what they are unhappy about today is not necessarily the tax treaty themselves, but the terms of the tax treaty, i.e., the sharing of taxing rights that are provided in the treaty themselves, right? So with this background, in my view, Mauritius should be positive about these new renegotiations and agree on a sharing of taxing rights, which is considered by both countries as being fair. And I think this is doable. This is perfectly doable. It's only then that we've removed all these types of tensions, of apprehensions, about one state trying to get an edge over the other, that we'll be able to put these types of tensions to rest, and we'll be able to focus on the actual business and the real business. Now, while we do all this, I think there's something very important that we all need to realize. The mere fact that a foreign government wants a treaty to be renegotiated with Mauritius means that it still wants a tax treaty to be in place between our two countries in the first place, right? Otherwise, it would not open the line of negotiation. I think this is how we need to view these renegotiations. So to take the examples you've mentioned about Zambia and South Africa, it means they still want our two countries to be bonded by a treaty. And I think this is positive news. And if you take the example of the last case we had, i.e. that of Zambia, then the Zambian Cabinet of Ministers itself made it very clear that they would like to initiate discussions with Mauritius, which will review the sharing of taxing rights and take anti-abuse provisions in the treaty. So all in all, I mean, they all want to still keep the ties with Mauritius, albeit on different terms. And we need to be cognizant of the fact that what has worked in the past would not work in the same manner in the future, and we need to adapt and get going with that. I think this is my perspective as to how we need to look at these renegotiations going forward.
Very nice, thank you so much. And it looks like one of our viewers has submitted a follow-up question to what you just said, where our viewer Kevin says, you mentioned Zambia as having a treaty. Are there treaties for Mozambique and the Democratic Republic of Congo as well?
So we've got a treaty with Mozambique, which is effective. As regards DRC, no, we don't have a treaty with DRC yet, but we do have one with Congo-Brazzaville.
Ah, very nice, very nice. Yes, and obviously as we move forward, that gives us something to work toward. Now, at this point, we are going to move on to viewer questions. So once again, if you are just now joining us, you do have that small Q&A section at the bottom of the screen. We encourage you to ask the questions that you would like to have answered. So moving on, we have something that was mentioned earlier regarding investment in human capital, Dr. Rama. So we have a question here that says, regarding human capital, there is a lack of specialists such as investment bankers, wealth and asset managers. Are there any sort of movements to increase these roles? And this might actually be a question, Sanjeev, for you to follow up on as well, if you have any insight.
So would you want me to have a go, or is it Sanjeev?
Oh, yes, you are in a better position to have a go at it.
No. Look, I think there are many ways of handling this issue. Now, we have gained a lot of expertise over the years in the different sectors, of global business. Of course, the easiest way to do it is to create an ecosystem that will attract large banks, foreign international banks, family officers, and other specialists to come and invest in Mauritius, which we have done over the years. The second one is, of course, to open up the country to expatriate. We've got domain knowledge, we've got specific skill in many of the areas that you have mentioned, whether it's investment banking, whether it's mergers and acquisition, whether it's wealth management, is to open up the country and to attract people who will come and share their expertise and share the experience with us, which we have done. Mauritius is one of the countries, that have always practiced openness. And in the last budget, government, has gone further by making it much easier, for professionals that have got some skill to come and share their expertise and experience in Mauritius. The third one is to attract the Mauritian diaspora. there are many Mauritians, who are abroad, whether it's in the UK, in France, in America, in Canada, in Australia, and that have done extremely well in the financial sector. And I think it's possible, to attract these people who've got the domain knowledge, who've got the specific capacity, in the areas that you have just mentioned, to come and work and live in Mauritius. And last but not least, is to train our own people. You need to expose them to the challenges and to the complexities, of global business, either when they learn from people who know on the job, or by sending them, abroad and to learn the expertise. I mean, we do that in our own company, at Sun, where we'll send some of our staff, whether it's London, Singapore, or Luxembourg, so that they can sharpen their expertise, they can sharpen their knowledge, and then they can come back to Mauritius and obviously serve the international clients much better. So I think it's a combination, of learning, investing in quality education, in training, opening up the country, trying to attract, the diaspora to come to Mauritius. And the more business you get, obviously you have no choice than to learn as you go across.
Very nice. Thank you. Absolutely. Thank you for that insight. Looks like we're getting a lot of questions related to, of course, the coronavirus and how that's impacting Mauritius in general, the economy, the banking sector. I have a few questions related to that. Let's take a look here. I think the best way, we know that the finance sector represents about 12% of the country's GDP, and it was, for the most part, relatively unscathed from the COVID crisis. Now, Mr. Bassim, we have some questions here. Let's take a look. Oh, forgive me, I've lost my spot here. Thank you all for your questions. This is very nice. So moving forward, for a Fraser Bank or maybe the banking sector in general, is there any possibility that there could be any sort of shakeup related to the coronavirus as we move forward? Are there any procedures being put into place as Mauritius moves forward?
Well, one way to start about coronavirus or COVID-19, as it is better known, it has impacted every economy under the earth. So obviously everybody is impacted. I think the extent of the impact would be variable, but I think no economy has been left or has had a scathing attack on its economic performance. And most of the countries, to a large extent, have reacted, I would use the word cautiously, I would say a little similarly from a macro level perspective, that is to save jobs and to make additional capital in the form of debt or equity or convertible instruments available to businesses so that they remain current and they remain in a position to attract employment, and therefore there is no crisis in terms of people losing jobs over the initial period of time, which could be anything 6 to 12 months or maybe even longer if that is appearing to be necessary. In that regard, I would say, subject to correction by Dr. Sivan, the government has reacted very positively and very quickly in terms of indicating their intent and the desire and making available fresh capital in the form of debt, convertibles, or even in exceptional cases might even turn out to be equity after a period of time, and to support the wage payments by almost all the businesses. That is to keep the business alive and current. Now the challenge, in my opinion, is what next? The point at the end of the day is, I believe, and maybe I'm in a minority, everybody's business model will change. All businesses will have to think differently. There could be new business opportunities coming on the horizon, but that you can leave a little aside, but all existing businesses will have to rethink their business models. Cost containment or cost efficiencies will come into the forefront. Manner of assessing customer requirements, customer needs, and how you fulfill them will change. I think the adoption of digital platforms, at least by the financial services industry, will increase phenomenally. This is not to say that the banks were not ready for it, but I would say that at times consumers were not ready for it. And it is now the consumers or the customers of the banks who have found how necessary it is to select a bank which has the digital capability and connectivity. But these are certain changes which will come into being. We've seen all over the world that one of the businesses which grew during the COVID-19 period was Amazon. Why? Because they had the logistic framework to deliver things at home. So is that going to be a pattern going forward? Yes. Fundamentally, all businesses will have to be flexible. They cannot have the legacy issue which actually keeps them from responding to market changes. So all businesses must think and must implement strategies so that it enables them to respond to changing environments very quickly. Concepts like working from home and stuff like that will always come into place. That is very obvious. So going forward, at the moment, the Mauritian banking system is extremely robust. It has the capital and it has the liquidity. And it has a very powerful and understanding regulator to make sure that the banking system remains strong and healthy. This is the situation as it stands today. Going forward, I don't think anybody can predict with any degree of certainty as to how the credit risk environment will shape up. Liquidity and interest rates, one can predict. Liquidity should be available. Interest rates are likely to remain soft for quite some time. Maybe I think the predictions are over 3 to 4 years or even longer. But the question now is, how will the credit risk and the perception of the credit risk shape up? And once the credit risk starts getting damaged, you also, besides assessing the impact or the availability of debt, you also have to see how equity is also available. Because, debt will be leveraged on equity. So both principles of capital or both sources of capital will have to be engineered to be available where the businesses so require. We have the government reacting to it brilliantly. They've set up a special corporation which is going to be funded adequately and make available debt at cheaper terms and at favorable prices, but the instrument will be dependent upon how the businesses can absorb it. Yeah. So if you look at the scenario over the coming 1 or 2 years, the banking system will remain extremely robust and capable of absorbing all the developments. But these are early days. We still have to see how long the businesses will take to reshape themselves. For example, if somebody was to ask, when will the tourism business come back to its normalcy, it's very difficult to address that question because you can prepare your tourist sector to be ready, but somebody has to arrive to use those facilities. And that also has to be determined at the end of the day. So I would say it's a very difficult situation to actually predict what's going to happen 12 to 18 months onwards. At the moment, the approach is to firefight, to make sure that the businesses remain relevant and businesses remain ready to restart at the full capacity as soon as the opportunity arises. And to that extent, at this point in time, this economy has endeared itself to make that happen.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that. And yeah, we do find ourselves in unprecedented times, so it can be difficult to make clear projections for the future, but I think it seems that the banking sector is going to remain robust, as you said. Wonderful. Now, continuing on with the topic of the coronavirus pandemic, Akshar, we have a question here where Mauritius has released a budget that takes into account the effects of the coronavirus. So how does this budget, as well as recent budgets in the past, come together to continue to create an environment for investors that is still advantageous?
I think as regards this year's budget, Scott, I think we all need to agree that the COVID-19 pandemic has instilled in every one of us, willingly or unwillingly, a dose of nationalism. That's how it is, and I think everyone has experienced this. So this year's national budget has not been any exception with respect to that kind of sentiment. So in these unprecedented times, government gave priority in this budget to really supporting local businesses and employment, as opposed to really having a focus on foreign investors and foreign investments, at least from a fiscal perspective. From a business facilitation perspective, certainly there's been several measures that has been announced that is welcomed by foreign investors. The main ones being the relaxation of conditions for obtaining occupation permits and for holders of occupation permits to invest in Mauritius. But to answer your question from a pure tax perspective, how we're faring and how we've fared to be competitive in the with foreign investment in the future, I think we have to go back to two past budgets before this one, where we've witnessed a complete overhaul of our tax system. And we've done that to conform with the requirements of the OECD and the EU, but also to ensure that by so doing, our foreign investors, including DFIs and foreign government institutions and corporates, multinationals, and so on, they feel confident and attracted to use Mauritius as an IFC. So in this vein, all tax elements that we had in our legislations that could have been deemed to be potentially harmful from an international organization's perspective have been eliminated. Right? For example, we had one of those tax frameworks which we commonly refer to as the deemed foreign tax credit, which is available to certain types of companies. They've been abolished. We've instead come up with a uniform system of taxation, which is based on tax residency, but which is applicable to all types of companies in Mauritius and also available to both local investors and foreign investors alike. So we've done that while remaining tax competitive. And how we did that is simultaneously with this uniformization of the tax system, we've come up with an exemption method with respect to certain income streams, for example, dividends, interest, income derived by the fund industry, fund managers, and so on and so forth, where their tax burden can be reduced to a maximum of 3%. So in addition to this, we've also come up with a framework where international trading of goods, if done with substance in Mauritius, can be taxed at the rate of 3%. So all in all, there's been an ecosystem that has been built, which make sure that we're still competitive, albeit we could not be competitive across the board as was the case earlier, but we still maintain competitiveness in a whole range of business segments. Having said that, I think we also need to acknowledge that in today's world, you cannot, get a tax exemption or a tax benefit without demonstrating substance. Substance is key in today's world. Wherever you go across the world, be it a high tax jurisdiction, be it a low tax jurisdiction, be it a zero tax jurisdiction, we need to demonstrate substance in the jurisdiction where we claim we are tax resident. And I think we adopted that approach as well. So the exemption framework that we've put in place, we made sure that they're only available to entities which demonstrate appropriate level of economic substance in the country, so that we retain only credible foreign investors in our jurisdiction, and therefore we continue to work towards continuously uplifting our image internationally. Excellent. Now, those foreign investors who wish to benefit from those ecosystems, from our ease of doing business, we've talked about ease of doing business earlier on, our competitive tax framework, we appeal to them to also at the same time contribute to the economy through employment and expenditure in Mauritius. And I think that's a fair deal, right? And with this, we've also introduced a number of interesting tax holiday schemes, obviously linked to substance, but which can bring some more value add businesses in Mauritius. So I see one question which relates to intellectual property in Mauritius. So we've got in Mauritius a scheme that we've introduced that provides an 8-year tax holiday for income that you derive towards the development of intellectual property assets in Mauritius. Obviously, that has been done with the safeguards relating to substance. The methodology of applying the tax holiday is based on OECD's Nexus approach, as sets out under BEPS Option 5. But we've got a tax holiday scheme available. Like that, we've got a similar scheme for e-commerce platforms. So all in all, obviously, there's much more that we can do going forward. But what we've been able to achieve today, we've reformed our tax system to conform with international organizations' requirement. But at the same time, we've ensured that we remain largely competitive on a number of business segments.
Very nice, very nice. Thank you so much for that insight. I do have one more question here. As our time is just flying by today, I have a question that's curious of the perspective from each of our panelists. Does the panel have any comments on the EU and the grey listing that it placed Mauritius on, which I believe, Akshay, you had just briefly mentioned? For example, Dr. Rama, would a ruling such as this affect your jurisdiction?
I mean, of course, it affects our jurisdiction because of the reputational risk. Business continues. I must be candid, and frank to say that we are not happy the way this has happened, because Mauritius as a country believes that we have made significant progress in achieving, some of the objectives, laid down, either by ISAMLAG, by the FATF, and also by the EU. We also believe that there should have been more discussion, more dialogue, and more collaboration before Mauritius was put on that list. Now, of course, it makes life difficult to the extent that if the fund is coming from the EU, you have to do enhanced due diligence. It might increase the cost of doing business. But as we are talking now, I think business continues. As you mentioned earlier on, the financial sector, especially global business, has been one of the least affected sector of the economy of Mauritius. The fact that we are on the grey list of the FATF and also on the blacklist of the EU attracts attention, the wrong attention. And I think government, is committed to ensuring that we are delisted, both from the grey list and also from the blacklist as soon as possible. They are discussing, with the FATF. They are also in conversation with the EU to make sure that we comply with the regulations and also the rules, that have been laid down by the FATF. Now, there are 5 issues that have been flagged, and committees have been set up in order to ensure that we cure all these deficiencies that have been identified. Now, there are 2 sets of issues here. We are technically compliant, but we are being accused of not doing enough in terms of the effectiveness of these measures. And I think this is the work that is being done, by government in collaboration with the private sector to make sure that we resolve these 5 identified strategic deficiencies as soon as possible so that we can be delisted and we can continue, to develop global business as a key pillar of the Mauritian economy. It is tough, but I think investment continues. As you will realize, it's not easy to close business in one particular jurisdiction and to start in other jurisdiction. Mauritius still has some competitive advantage in terms of ease of doing business, ease of to restructure many of these activities, and we continue to see flow of investment into the global business. And of course, we hope that by the end of the year or by the beginning of next year, we'll be able to reach an agreement, first with the FATF to be removed from the grey list, and subsequently with the EU to be delisted from the blacklist.
Very nice. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Well, everyone, as we are running close to the end of our time, I do have one more question, and I'll direct that to actually each of our panelists. So we know that you all have dedicated a lot of time, energy, and hard work into seeing Mauritius reach the potential that we all know that it has. And in light of recent events, it would feel improper not to mention the events of this week as well. So I'm curious if anyone maybe has any words of confidence or any words of solidarity regarding both the recent events and, to answer our question of the webinar, why Mauritius is still a leading investment destination. And Sanjeev, would you care to begin?
Thank you. Whenever it's difficult, you ask me to begin, so that's very kind of you.
Oh, I apologize.
So, it's very difficult to find anything which is wrong with Mauritius from any aspect. I mean, as simple as the fact it's a beautiful island, it's a great place to live, it's got the talent, it's got a very, very proactive government. But I think one thing, in my opinion, and subject of course to correction again by Dr. Sitanan, what stands out is that Mauritius has been excellent in preserving the good things which small economies has and adopting the more proactive big achievements which big economies have shown, melt them together and produce an economic model which has been brilliantly successful. So to simplify, what do I really mean is that it's got a very robust and proactive association which we find between the government and the private sector. And this joint partnership has actually brought me to think and believe in what I call the public-private partnership. I think this is on display in Mauritius full-time and all the time. The government is willing to listen to the private sector so that they remain efficient and they remain competitive by global standards. And similarly, the private sector is willing to help out. And collectively, the society is so proud of the entire macroeconomic and the operating framework, which is also evident by the fact that almost everybody in the nation was willing to help out in this oil spill. All the citizens were willing to go onto the beachside and do whatever they could. And that I don't think happens in every country. You can't assume that. But here we have seen it. And they have operated jointly for the benefit of the entire economy. And that, I think, is Mauritius's greatest strength. That's the way I will take away.
Absolutely, that's beautifully said. I think it's great. I think it's wonderful when the Mauritian people come together in sight of something that could be considered or is considered tragic. Dr. Rama, did you have anything to add today?
Yes, I mean, let me make 3 points,
Yes.
First, to be frank, I think we could have prevented the ship from running aground on our reef. I think we could also have prevented the oil spill with more preparedness, with better timing in terms of reaction and better mobilization of resources, both local and international. But what has happened has happened. And obviously, I think all of us in Mauritius congratulate, the population of the country with the speed and solidarity with which they have reacted. Very often, with very little means in terms of equipment to do their best in order to mitigate the impact of this ecological disaster. So I think we could have done better, and Mauritius is known for doing better. I think the second point, that even though in the long term Mauritius will do well and has done well also since the past, we are facing a very difficult period. This is uncharted territory, and we are facing 4 problems at the same time. There is the public health emergency, the COVID-19. There is also the impact on the economy, which is devastating, especially as Mauritius is a very open economy. Our frontiers are closed. So obviously it's a very difficult choice between lives and livelihood. We have the problem of the blacklist and the grey list, from the FATF and the EU. And as if that was not enough, now we have the ecological disaster. So obviously, these are challenging times. And I think it's going to be difficult, for Mauritius for the next 2 or 3 years. So we need to clean, we need to repair, we need to rescue, we need to restore, and we need to recover. And that will take foresight, that will take decisive policy measures. However, we've come from far in the past. We were written off, at independence, by people who went on to become Nobel Prize winner in economics. We had no resources. So we have come from very far to be around $10,000 per capita today. It is true that there are challenges in terms of the inclusiveness and the sustainability of that growth, but I think going forward, if we provide more certainty, more stability, and more predictability, like we have done in the past since independence, I think the population can rise to the challenge, and we should continue to progress. Obviously, after 3 or 4 years, that would be extremely difficult because of the 4 challenges that I've just mentioned. So congratulations to the people of Mauritius who have shown solidarity, against the odds of this disaster. But I think with the right policy framework, with decisive action that must be taken, I think we should be able to reverse this trend and to sustain, growth that is both inclusive and sustainable in the long term.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And I agree. I think there is something to be said regarding, within an obstacle, there is also opportunity. And I think that's very clear, and Mauritius is capable of reaching that. And Akshat, do you have any final words of confidence for us today?
Yeah, no, I think the best lesson, Scott, is probably for you. Now you understand why it's difficult to speak after Rama on a general question.
My order was all wrong today, huh?
Yeah, I think he's been very, very comprehensive in his response, and he's gone through the issues that we really need to tackle. I think it's a real fact that Mauritius is now beyond the day-to-day challenges that we face. Is now going through several gigantic turbulences. The COVID-19 has been there. We've tackled it well, I would say, from a scientific perspective, but the economic consequences of it are yet to be seen in the future. There's been this unfortunate oil spill. I think we need this issue, and we've got this EU FATF issue. On the oil spill, I think we've seen marvelous episodes of solidarity among members of the population. I think this is very, very, brings a lot of warmth to us as a nation, and also brings a lot of hope or confirmation of hope for this country. And that augurs well, because your question is about the hope for the country. With this kind of population, I think challenges do not really worry us. We'll find a way to overcome them. So I'll just, as an end word, I'll just, air a little bit as to my hope for the country going forward, especially in the circumstances that we are living in today. I think we need to target having a sustainable and decent growth rate in real terms in the years to come, especially in the context of the COVID-19. I sincerely hope that we continue to constantly attract foreign investors in our jurisdiction. We are able to uphold the competitiveness of the jurisdiction going forward. We can strive to reduce unemployment and create jobs in these difficult circumstances. Our frontiers has been closed for several months now, and tourism is one of the highest income earning industry for Mauritius. So we hope that we are able to settle on that. We also have a lot of hope that we succeed in stabilizing the currency. We've seen the rupee sliding from the beginning of the year, and it does not help in this situation where we are not getting that amount of foreign currency, because our exports are really at a very slow pace, but we have needs where we have demands for foreign currency. And last but not least, we get off once for all this EU and FATF list, and we get on with improving the competitiveness of the jurisdiction going forward. I think that's in a nutshell what my hope is for Mauritius going forward.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that insight. Those are very beautiful messages of confidence for Mauritius. And with that, everyone, we have run out of time. We went over by 5 minutes, but I do appreciate everyone sticking around with us. I first want to extend an enormous thank you to our panelists for joining us today, and to our viewers. The amount of questions that we received was incredible, and thanks to you, we made this webinar a fun and engaging success. As a quick reminder, you will be able to view this webinar on our website, which is penresa.com, and you'll also be able to read Penresa's Africa Undiscovered reports on that website as well. And until next time, be well and have a wonderful day. Thank you.